Hi there, welcome to your July 2018 Energy Extra. I'm doing a video on life cycles because there are predictable patterns as we move through linear time. Astrology is like a big clock, and it gives us a sense of some of the lessons and developmental possibilities that we all encounter in these decades and cycles of our lives. So let's start right off with the 20s. I'm not going to address children at this juncture, but in the 20s, from about 28 to 30, we've got this lovely energy running called Neptune Sextile Neptune. And this is where creativity and compassion and artistry and almost a kind of a sense of superhumanism can creep into our reality. In the 20s, it's exploring everything. Everything's possible, and play, and peer groups, and self-expression. Then what comes in is the first of the Saturn return, usually around 28 to 30, 31. I have a lot of clients come in during their Saturn returns. And, Saturn is... It returns to the natal birth chart. It has an orbital period of 30 years, approximately. And Saturn represents form and limitation in the maturing process and having to commit to something and responsibility. And it can be a bit of a shock because in the 20s you are meant to explore, experiment, and engage in temerarious behavior. And experience socially is necessary for the 20 age group, and it's needed. What are your relationships to your friends and the world, and how others see you is quite a focus in the 20s. This is the stage that anything is possible. Risks are taken, opportunities are explored, and curiosity reigns supreme. And the prefrontal cortex is still developing, the part of the mind that rules executive decision making and consequences. So this is a strong developmental period for consequences of actions. The studies do show that girls' prefrontal cortex matures more quickly than boys. That may have changed since I last researched it, but there is a little bit of a lag time with some of that male development. And, all the while, Saturn is moving through each sign, approximately 2.5 years in each sign, and it moves through each of the 12 houses in your charts. And Saturn is teaching the lessons of the physical plane, the three-dimensional plane. Saturn is also a great teacher of manifestation and directing energy. So as you approach your 30-year mark, often a sense of crisis begins. Depending on your Saturn position, this crisis can develop in your work, in your family, your relationships, education, finances. And Saturn is kind of a plotting and focused energy, moving you along in your growth and maturity and your sense of reality. So it's a time to question what the lessons are. And those lessons help to define yourself and to help you grow as a spiritual being. Things and people and circumstances are often washed away at the Saturn return, especially the first one, often leaving a feeling of loss or grief, and it may even be the loss of childhood or the loss of innocence in some capacity. I find when the Saturn return comes in, people get married. They buy houses, they have babies, they leave relationships, some struggle financially, make career choices, deal with limiting circumstances in their family or social circles. Yet this very cycle is intended to spur you on to further growth and understanding. And a sense of limitation or obstruction can be kind of magnified during the Saturn return. And the need to make concrete choices to define your life path and your future goals are often refined during the Saturn return. In the relationship with Saturn in your chart is certainly notable. If you blend well with focus and responsibilities and productivity, you can traverse the Saturn return a little bit more easily. If you don't have strong Earth in your chart, the Saturn return can be kind of shocking and heavy and depressing and whoa. But planetary transits, I mean, the way to look at this is it's an opportunity to accelerate vibrations with your growth, and it's our cellular response to life itself. And if we manage to avoid the work of one transit, there can be problems further on down the line. And by that, I mean if you're hanging on to something that is really not part of your evolution and growth, and it's out of just obligatory or habit or the fear of change, when that Saturn square hits, it's going to be a often more challenging time. Saturn also often affects those lower chakras, that root chakra, second chakra. How safe do you feel? And what are your ancestors, parents, and society whispering about in your ear? And not good enough? What does success mean to them? So is it projected responsibilities? We really don't move into maturity and true autonomy until we cut and cauterize the ties of the family influences and expectations. So, sometimes I see back pain, intestinal trouble, IBS, reproductive organs, joint pain, teeth issues are not uncommon at all during Saturn returns and Saturn squares. So it's a time to work on your feelings. It's time to express yourself. It's a time of major adjustments and revision of attitudes and important decisions and changes in responsibility. How much is too much or not enough? All of those can be areas of concern. Have you been overgiving? Have you been stepping up to something that really isn't your responsibility? And facing problems alleviates the pressure. Again, if it's postponed or repressed, that pressure increases. So the first 29 years of life really are reactions to conditioning and to family values and karma and parental influence and societal pressures. And no longer does there seem to be endless possibilities as you move through this Saturn return, as you've lived out experiments and you've youthful illusions are now have you working at fulfilling your life drama and the role that you'll play. Saturn return is often putting on, donning, releasing an old role and donning a new role. So things are often swept away during this path. A lot of your dreams during Saturn returns may be, I'm naked and I'm not sure where I need to go. Well, being naked in dreams is not sure what your role is, and that would be apropos during a Saturn return transit. So it's an important time of free will at operation and making wise choices and understanding that any of the contraction and heaviness will pass. It will pass. Now we're going to talk about the 30s and the transits that occur in the 30s. In the 30s, a lot of work is being done. A lot of development is being done. And this is post-Saturn return, so it is a time to fly straight and kind of release those shoulds and ought tos and align your inner reality with your outer reality and look to the Capricorn house as well in your chart for clues. And creating structure and acting upon your instincts and urges and releasing outdated work roles and responsibilities through the 30s. Now, as we head into the mid-30s, we hit another transit called the Pluto Square Pluto transit, and that's mid-30s. Let's give it a 3 to 4 year through that mid-30 point. And, Pluto has a 248-year orbital period, so it moves slowly and it goes back over points in the chart, back and forth at least 3 times, really being thorough. And, Pluto this Pluto square can be about activating the Kundalini energy. And the Kundalini is that coiled energy at the base of the spine that, when activated, starts rising up through the chakra system. And I was absolutely having some of these experiences in my 30s when I was reading for people. I remember lying in my bed for about a year and a half, and my bed would move. It would just move, and I witnessed a lot of paranormal things during this time as well. And it took the period after that to get grounded and clear on what had just happened. So activation of Kundalini energy and that unfurling snake up and throughout the chakra system. And the understanding that sex is not just a genital engagement, it brings it up through the chakra system. Sex and orgasm actually is a resetting of the system. It's a built-in feature. It's kind of like when things get out of vibrational order, orgasm resets the chakra system and the energy systems. It's a reset button for wellness and vibrational balance. So with the Pluto square, Pluto, though, it's a time of some strange insights and strange developments and situations as you struggle for a sense of renewal and self-mastery. It's a strong emotional period for clearing, even while there can be some intense emotional encounters, which is the propulsion for change, and making that which is unconscious conscious. I was doing a lot of dream work, and later on in that period I was doing a radio show on the subconscious mind, because I tend to teach what I'm learning and interested in. And the subconscious is kind of where we're programmed. A lot of programming's going on in our first 5-6 years of life, seeding that subconscious as well as past cycles. So the subconscious is rumbling with the Pluto square and bringing things up often through dream work and meditation and externally even. Past life regression can be extremely potent during this time, but it also stirs up, intensifies one's libido. You're being pushed to evolve during the Pluto square. Life and death struggles sometimes can be the feel of it. And you can leave your body when stress and pain occur. But it's learning to stay in your body and mastering fear and those deepest desires, deepest fears, the monster under the bed kind of imprint that all humans bring forth into their experience. But Pluto seeks to destroy old patterns of thought and behavior, as well as eliminating all sorts of psychic residue, which can be preventing growth. Eliminating psychic residue. And it's a soul urging, and it's pressing in on the ego and the survival mechanisms this mid-30-year period. And you need the time after the transit. Pluto transits, you need some time with that rear view mirror to get a handle on what it was all about, to gain perspective and clarity, because those waters can feel pretty muddy while you're in the midst of this emotional clearing. Changes feel intense and concentrated, while at the same time their full implications on the totality of your life are still kind of subtle. So it's simply impossible for most people to assimilate the complete meaning of this transit from one phase of life to another until you've already gotten on the other side. But it can feel like the rug is being pulled out from under you, or that you're sinking into quicksand as you seek firm ground and security and familiar guideposts. Insecurity is a hallmark of the Pluto square Pluto transit. And it takes time for that left brain to discern and to glean meaning, while the subconscious and the generational emotional past is in a state of clearing. So it's kind of like a freedom from bondage is how you can view that vibrationally, and working through the light and dark. That's what we do here on this planet, the old and the new. And the seed, it speeds up your evolution as you release karma. And the sun in the chart is where you are assimilating, whereas conversely, Pluto forces elimination of what needs to go in order to grow. I like that. Pluto, what needs to go in order to grow? Pluto square. Now we move on to the next passage, and this is more in the latter 30s. Let's give it a range of 38 to 44. This is the Uranus opposition Uranus. This is what we used to call quintessentially the midlife crisis. Uranus's orbit is about an 84-year period, so it's very predictable in the geometric relationships it makes to itself. And, you know, you can't, I find people that late 30s, early 40s is when people are starting to come into their real purpose on the planet. They start to work with that soul purpose and the Dharma side of things after some of the karma has been worked through. So, you know, the Uranus opposition Uranus in the latter 30s to early 40s often affects the heart, the throat, and sometimes that third eye chakra. It increases heart attacks at this age, as well as extremely reactive behavior. Notice a lot of the men in this group, this age group, right along what we see as the shooters out there in the world too. Killing sprees and rampages. If they don't have a handle on their own chakra and energy systems, it just all is externalized into rage and reactiveness. I find that women often experience this period as blockages through that throat chakra, late 30s, early 40s, speaking their truth, finding their voices, feeling unheard. So this is an important time to master and to be aware of, because if you don't awaken and open to this, this is when I see the self-medicating really coming in. You know, and women especially, they just start medicating their emotions because they don't rise to the call of their clarity and their voice and their autonomy, and they start sitting and suppressing. There's another opportunity around the 50-year mark, but we'll get to that. So, you know, heart energy is all about this, and losing your faith in your existence. Heart attacks can be extreme during this period because you're vibrating higher and faster. This is an electrical time vibrationally where the chakra system is seeking an upgrade and a place for electricity to live and to move. And if you're not working with that and suppressing and sitting on it, it will sometimes take root in health and health crisis and disease. So, yeah, some increase. Drugs and alcohol, sleepless nights, typical. Feeling one's mortality, freedom urges, sexual urges are strong now. The desire to break free from onerous duties and responsibilities and relating archetypes. If you've been playing out a role in your relationships and you're really becoming clear that this is a role that is not uniquely yours any longer, and you try and just stay there and stay with it, it's a time where you really have to acknowledge your need for growth and development and change. So a strong electrical charge in the body, in the endocrine system, and the central nervous system, buzzing, electrical force surging up the spine and chakras. So I see more heart blockages in men and more throat blockages in women. Although for men it's getting better, the more they step into primary parenting roles. There's nothing like really being engaged with children to open that heart chakra and to bring new meaning and dimensional understanding to life and love itself. So it's kind of letting go of youth and integrating the opposite male or female polarity of self. Ideally, we've all come here to be kind of integrated with both of these energies. And when we project too much male energy on others, too much female energy on others, we're missing the chance to be a whole integrated person ourselves. So it's moving into the mental plane when you develop your purpose for this incarnation. That's higher vibration of this. And the real midlife crisis sets in about 42, 43. So if you haven't done the work of the Uranus opposition. But ideally, it's finding more purpose and higher vibratory awareness. And, it's a propulsion to find meaning. So in the 40s, we're still working with the residue of the Uranus opposition that began in the late 30s. But what comes in the 40s, about 40 to 42, is the Neptune Square. And Neptune takes about 165 years to work its way around the zodiac. And with the Neptune Square, this is building upon the work of the Uranus opposition. It's dissolving boundaries and dissolving ego boundaries and rigidity. And it's sublime, it's strange, it's blissed out feelings. Again, this can be an increase of drug and alcohol intake because there's a desire with the Neptune Square to experience outside of the mundane. And it can be quite delusioned. It can be quite fantastical and magical and artistic and creative. Increased compassion and empathy with this Neptune Square in your early 40s. And this can be a time of kind of impermanent merging with the self-help gurus and people and situations and beliefs. But trust that this movement and this lack of clarity, once you get on the other side of that towards your mid-40s, the dissolving has occurred. And you can then gain clarity. The Neptune Square, I use the metaphor of being out on a lake in a boat and you can't see the shore. It's where you feel kind of unmoored from land or unmoored from reality or unmoored from structure. But that's how things work. We get untethered in order to open us up for new insights, developments, possibilities, options, and perceptions. So that's the big transit of the 40s. I don't have a lot more on that period, but as you hit the latter 40s, you're going to be moving into that Chiron return. And that occurs right around the 50 mark. Let's give that 48 to 52. And I want you to stay here because I'm going to stop and start for the 50s decade. Okay, so welcome to the transits of the 50s. Now, like the 30s, a lot is going on in this period of time. We're heading into the Chiron return, which begins in the late 40s. And the Chiron return is a very powerful passage. It's a time to master fear. Much of our incarnating on the planet is about overcoming limitation and fear. And by the age of 50, Chiron has transited all of the planets in your chart. So you've got something to build upon and reference. Crisis of meaning, letting go of ego attachment, linear mentality. It's time for intuitive and right brain to grow and equal the left brain dominance. Because when we are predominantly working through that left brain of ego and managing linear time, driving on the right-hand side of the road, raising children, going grocery shopping, it doesn't allow for that right brain, very real information exchange of being guided and intuition and being whispered and acting upon urges and creative visualization. So the Chiron return is urging a merging between the left brain and right brain so that they're holding hands, so that they're hugging. It doesn't mean supplementing or sitting upon the left brain. We need that to orchestrate our lives. But now the Chiron return is asking for a more even dynamic between the hemispheres of mind. So it's time for intuition, and it's sexually meant to be an all-pervasive energizing force and not just a genital focus, because the energy between the galactic dynamic times and the way that we operate within space and time here on Earth. Let me say that again. Galactic energy is not bound by linear time. And this also speaks to spiritual awakening, maybe also more Kundalini development, which frequently is affecting sex and orgasm and experience and the meaning that you apply to these areas. So this is also a balancing. It can, for some people, the Chiron return be about a mental crisis of meaning. And then emptying out so the soul can come in more. When we're just living our life through personality, we're leaving out a lot of resources in information. I find during the Chiron return, and certainly after the Chiron return, people have a renewed sense of spirituality and meaning and even symbolism in their life. And we're also heading into in the mid-50s, the Neptune trine Neptune. We also are hitting our moon return, our progressed moon return. It's a whole new cycle emotionally with home and family and your habits and how you set up your habits. And this coincides with the Neptune trine Neptune of the mid-50s. You find your focus shifting to a more spiritual view of the world. And you have opportunities now to enjoy the people and the environment surrounding you without probably, hopefully, worrying about material survival. And it's a beneficial time for exploring, spiritual, metaphysical, artistic pursuits. And it can manifest in a number of ways. It's an opportunity to see your life in a spiritual dimension that you may never have perceived before. So, first of all, you may discover an increased empathy for people in your everyday life. You can more easily put yourself in another person's shoes that you've never been able to do before. You can feel what someone else feels. Neptune trine Neptune. Consequently, you have more sympathy and compassion for other people's problems in this mid-50 time period. And your compassion springs from a realization of the essential unity of yourself and all life. All is one mentality. All is one understanding. And for most people, this is not always an entirely conscious realization, but you feel an increased involvement with others, but you don't know quite where it's come from. On the other hand, this can be a conscious feeling where you do become more attracted to mystical philosophies and metaphysics and try to verbalize what you're beginning to experience. So it's a reawakened interest in all of these more sublime understandings and feelings and paradigms. And you may even have more psychic experiences during this passage. And even if by temperament you're not inclined to mysticism, you'll experience its effects with increased idealism and an increased willingness to work on behalf of the world. So, whatever else happens, you'll feel more capable of selfless action during this Neptune trine Neptune in the mid-50s. Then we head into the late 50s, and we've got our second Saturn return. So on we go. In the second Saturn return, if you faced your first one honestly, then this is a very empowered time, the second Saturn return, and of real conscious awareness and flying straight and releasing roles and relationships and work responsibilities and furthering and consolidating your purpose on the planet. So your potential for worldly success and authority are strengthened in some very direct ways with this second Saturn return. And of course, you look to the natal house, and we're Capricorn, for clues on the areas that this is affecting. The aging process comes more strongly into view with a second. It's like, oh, I only have so much time potentially. I better get moving, kind of thing. And another business may be birthed, another chapter written, new relationships embarked upon. It's the next cycle of achievement. And now the chakra system should be running and deepening and allowing a deeper reservoir of available energy. So it's concentrated purpose and focus and effectiveness. Open chakras in that second area, especially about emotion and creativity and expressiveness. So what was upper chakra energy is now becoming more integrated in your work and actions and even in your body. You're bringing this down into your life. You're integrating soul with body, mind, personality, ego. It can be a very strong time of more congruent energy flow. And if the first Saturn return was aborted and not integrated, this may feel like a real slowing down of the life force when health issues are really arising and when limitations are being experienced in one's life and relationships. But with this, we've got the Pluto trine Pluto from 56 to 60. 50s are a very busy time, just like the 20s and 30s. Pluto is trining Pluto from the 56 to 60 year mark, which is saying, yes, we've got you. You can handle this. The subconscious is more aligned with your urgings and soul, and so this can be a very satisfying time, this period. Then in the 60s, we're seeing another Uranus square Uranus. So this again is about letting go of roles, letting go of residuals, really going for it, and giving yourself more freedom and making adjustments. Squares often ask for very conscious adjustments. So the Uranus square Uranus is a little bit of pressure because when you're in your 60s, you feel like you've got a handle and you're all settled. But the Uranus square is saying, yeah, but there's still some more tweaking to do. There's still some more authentic self-expression and freedom and untethering yourself from what you thought was a non-moving or static time in your life. So the Uranus square Uranus can be another time in your 60s where it's like, well, wait a minute, I thought I was all settled. But this urging electrically and spiritually is urging you on to another level of growth through freeing yourself up from old and outdated, perhaps emotional expression, structures that you have in your life. Some people sell their house, they downsize, they move to Tahiti, buy a townhome, that kind of thing. So that's very interesting in the 60s. And then in the 70s, you're hitting your third, no, that's not right. Your 70s, you're dealing with a Saturn square Saturn. Okay. So the 70s are often about limiting situations, about your roles, your structures. Some people are moving into retirement. They're changing their lifestyle. There may be some grieving between identity, because a lot of people's identity are built around their work, what they do out there, their children, raising their children. So this mid-70s period is a time of some of that falling away and some grieving around that. And what are some of the old habits that are now in the way for another level of freedom and interaction and self-expression in your life that is not as tethered to work routines and schedules? And then in the 80s, when we hit our 80s, there's a lot going on here too. We hit our Pluto opposition Pluto from about 87 years to 90 years. So this period is really representing the fulfillment of those changes that were made at an earlier time in your life, and examining the degree to which your life has been complete and rounded. Have you managed to achieve balance among the various things and issues that competed for your attention at earlier cycles? And the changes that occur during this transit are likely to be the result of whatever was not fully done in earlier cycles. However, few of us live our life in a perfectly balanced manner, and no matter how hard you try, there'll be some things that you have to deal with now that you did not deal with previously. And at times it may seem that these changes are unnecessary and intrusive. You may feel that you have lived a long life and should have some stability now. During this passage is often when the elderly, and this time in your life, you're relinquishing driving due to cognitive awareness and reflexes. You may be handing over some responsibility to those who are in some sort of care or support function in your life. I find during this time that there can be resentment with giving up some of those responsibilities that you've held close to yourself as a sense of independence and autonomy. Although this is changing, this is not, a mandate, because people are aging at very earlier rates than we've formerly seen before. The more they embody light, that shifts the aging process. But change is always a part of life, and you're still changing and growing, and you'll do so as long as you live. And I hear this too. It's like, well, what am I still doing here? I'm like, well, we're all here learning. Well, I should have learned everything by now. So there's kind of a fixity that I see with this age group and demographic, and they don't understand what the meaning perhaps of this time of life is. But I find that there's a lot of value in that playfulness and releasing controls and old roles, and really sinking into the contemplative and the purposeful and the meaningful, which is more spiritually and emotionally based rather than outer world expressed. And, there's a great Buddhist saying that says, enlightenment is easy for those who have no preferences. And we're also heading into a Uranus return. That's the only time we see Uranus return into its original birth spot is in the mid-80s. So this can be a time of really elevated and enlivening and settling into a period of time that does not require as much from you, and you have more freedom to direct the expression and the engagement. I hope you have found these helpful. Much love to all of you. Be well, and I'll speak with you soon.